Welcome to the Beyond the Horizons podcast, where we delve into and expand upon some of the key issues raised in the Enable 2024 MSP Horizons report, produced in conjunction with Canalys. In this episode, I'm joined by Enable's AI strategist, Nicole Reineke, to look at how the landscape is rapidly changing for AI usage and how MSPs can maximise the opportunity the technology affords their businesses. Nicole, thank you for joining me. I thought it would be interesting today really to take a bit of time to look at the state of AI in the MSP industry. I mean, obviously we did a report, the MSP Horizons report last year that found, or the actual research was done last year, that found somewhere around about 75% of MSPs are already using AI, but it's kind of condensed into things like marketing, code, and code creation and stuff like that. So, have we seen that changing? Do we think, and what do you see really as the opportunity for AI within the MSP sector?
Yeah, so there's a lot of enthusiasm around it, obviously, and we are seeing it shift from a year ago. People were using it, as you said, to just help with marketing capabilities, to write content or to create documentation, and in some cases to actually help with their sales organization. And we're seeing that shift more towards strategic opportunities. So in that sort of AI opportunity, we're seeing things like forward looking at ticket resolution, where we're seeing predicting what people would want installed within their customer base. So we're really seeing people move from a reactive, let's just go use or chat GTP, to proactively going out and looking for opportunities to reduce business cost, to increase efficiency within their organization, and really to reduce human error. So that's a big thing that we're seeing in the MSP space.
It's interesting because, I mean, I suppose initially I remember there was not Empower this year, but last year we had a little session talking about AI there, and there was certainly some concerns and fears around what it was going to do. Do you, or the effects it was going to have, and some of the things that we needed to be looking at putting in place, like guardrails and stuff like that. Are we still seeing sort of a concern with the sort of dangers of AI? But do you think, or are people kind of, I suppose, becoming more accepting of the fact that it's here and it's here to stay, and we're kind of getting on with it?
I think people are becoming more accepting because they're able to create categories of danger or challenge in their mind. So we have this interesting thing that's happening, which is shadow AI, where more than 75% of our employees or people across the enterprise and MSP world, 75% of us are actively using AI tools ourselves. So we've hit this critical mass where people are comfortable using it for themselves and therefore becoming more comfortable with having it as part of their business operations. And when we did a poll recently at the Empower conference, we asked people, what are the things that are causing hesitation or causing concern about AI adoption? The number one wasn't, I'm afraid of it taking over or I don't understand. It's actually regulation now. So we've moved from I'm afraid of it to I need to understand what the regulatory implications are of adopting AI in my business. Because AI, by definition, works with data. And so you're having it impact your business by taking in your customer data, perhaps, taking in personal information from your employees, from job applicants, whatever you're choosing as your use case is using data. Therefore, you are subject to the regulations of wherever that data came from, both geographically and sort of industry or vertical focused data. So that's really it's a really big challenge. And how do MSPs get their arms around this? So that's where we're seeing concern go now. Not it's no longer, oh, I'm afraid of it. It's what are the implications when I do adopt it, and how can I de-risk or reduce the the litigation or governance implications of using AI.
Hmm. That's it. I mean, I know certainly from our perspective within Enable, I know that I think if we're going to use AI tools, a lot of those tools have to be approved. Um, and that's a lot of that is to do with what the data, where the data is going and where it's stored. Um, but I suppose also off the back of that, we're sort of, I suppose, kind of picking up, I suppose, on or continuing that conversation around some of the changes in terms of how people are viewing AI. The concept of sort of it threatening people's jobs doesn't seem to be as prevalent, I suppose, now as it was kind of a year ago, 18 months ago, whenever Chat
Yeah.
GPT kind of landed on us. I can't remember now.
Yeah, it's interesting because people at first were very like, "Oh no, the AI is going to be able to do my job." But what we're actually seeing is that AI is really only as good as the human it augments. So in order for AI to provide value, there has to be somebody creating it and somebody interacting with it. So human interaction with that AI. There has to be somebody interacting with it that actually has an understanding of what it means to have good results. So that call for knowledge and call for expertise doesn't actually go away in the majority of the use cases with AI. It actually becomes more important, but you do get to control a larger number of outcomes. So for example, as somebody who runs products, I will still do interviews with my customers and I will still take in all of that information and then distill it down into here's what my learnings are. But with I could actually have a larger number of conversations, bring all of that information in, have AI do an initial analysis, and then as an expert on top of that analysis, I will go and do deep dive, looking into certain aspects of the conversation. So it doesn't eliminate the need for expertise, but it does create a larger frame of action that any human with expertise can take. So it's
Mm.
really exciting. It actually makes you better at your job and it makes it so that you can do more.
Mm, And I suppose there are two elements that are really to this that kind of come that I'm thinking of now as we're talking, is that the element of, I suppose, using external AI tools, so like directly using ChatGPT and stuff like that, but also the way vendors like ourselves are looking to embed AI into the actual into their technology. So there's kind of two distinct areas of development, I suppose, aren't there?
Yeah, and within the technology, there's also that human in the loop approval requirement. So when you're building AI into your technology, if you do it in a an externally focused or a context approved way, what you're doing is you're saying, here are things that we know we can describe mathematically, and we can say with a high level of probability, here's the likeliest label or pattern or definition of what we're seeing. And then that information gets gets displayed out to a human and that human makes a decision against it or that human approves a decision that the AI recommends on it. So it can do things like amazing automation, but it doesn't do that in a black box, or it should not do that in a black
Mm,
box, at least not where we are from a technology perspective today. So it will improve your ability to do more aspects of your job faster if you're using tools that have AI built in. Cove is a great example. So in our Cove technology, we have this AI that's built in, or machine learning, that will actually say, there's a machine, it has done a recovery. After a certain period of time, I'm going to take a snapshot and say, does this machine's boot window look like it was a successful recovery, or does it look like it was an unsuccessful recovery? So it recognizes a
mm,
pattern and it says, does a label successful or unsuccessful? And then it takes an action or recommends an action against that, meaning, do I need to recover again? Or do I just say this was successful and then notify a human? So that saves a human from having to go and proactively look at it to see if it worked or not, but it doesn't eliminate the need for a technician on the other
mm,
side.
mm, mm, mm. And I suppose it's interesting because when you get into that concept of embedding AI into products, then and I suppose this kind of alludes a little bit back to what you were talking about regulation. Is the sort of areas, I suppose, and things that we need to focus on then are you can't just embed an AI into your technology and not tell people what's going on. I mean, there needs to be, and I know that we've recently set out our, I suppose, our AI pillars, haven't we, in terms of that. So what what is the protocol for doing that? Should we be do we need to be telling people what we're doing in terms of embedding the AI technology into products, and
Yeah.
how do we do that? And then, how do we, I suppose, yeah, set up that process that we're informing them properly and that we're keeping them on board, and we're making a pledge, I suppose, isn't it? A pledge of how we use it and how we use that data. So how's that working and how's that playing out?
Yeah, so if you look at many of the largest organizations that are technology driven organizations, we've all come to a similar agreement, which is it is really important for us to make sure customers understand what's happening with their data and they understand what processes that are happening to them or to their data and what the implication of those processes are. And so we describe those as pillars of humane technology. And specifically, when we're talking about AI, we describe them as AI pillars. So
Hmm.
you want to make sure, from a legal perspective, that you are not doing anything with data that users aren't aware of or have consented to, or anything that's not appropriate for the location that you're
Mm.
in. So if you are, for example, in New York State, there is a rule that says you cannot process resumes using AI and make decisions against those resumes without being completely transparent about it. So the people who apply must understand and know that this is what you're doing with their very private, very personal information. And so when you look at something like that, it's a legal requirement to communicate to all of your users or all of the people who are engaging with you that you will put their information through AI processes and algorithms, and there will be an outcome which impacts them. So for the legal reasons, right, you have to be very transparent with as much information as you possibly can. And that includes what information is going to be touched by the technology, what the decision or implications of that data being touched and the decisions or outcomes of that process. And then you want to make sure that you are only using technology where it's absolutely necessary. So, we, as a forward thinking technology company, have set out our AI pillars around consent, meaning we will not just use your data and then tell you. We are going to request permission for data where that data should could be impacted by AI so that you get a better experience, but you're not just being thrown into AI against your will or passively being told about your AI. So we have consent as one pillar. We have transparency as our second pillar. So we are actually publishing where we have AI technology in our products. We will tell you where it is. We're going to tell you the data that's being used, and we're going to tell you the outcomes of those algorithms or those processes. So you'll know exactly what's happening. And then the third pillar, obviously, is the context based pillar, which is we are not going to throw everything that you have into a large language model. It's not appropriate. It's actually not sustainable
Mm.
and it doesn't help in many cases. So we are going to be very clear and very specific about which types of technology we're using for which use cases and only use those which move us all forward together.
And that's how we're setting our stall out. I mean, obviously, how does that I suppose then kind of roll down the chain to MSPs? Do they need to
Yeah.
be doing a similar thing in terms of, if they're using AI within our technology, do they need to be explaining that to their customers? And how does that kind of, I suppose, yeah, it's how does it roll down the chain?
Yeah. So MSPs need to take a similar stance, right? You need to understand, given your physical location and the physical location of any of the data that's being impacted, what are your data and security practices going to be regarding that data in alignment with AI technology? So you have to actually create a set of standards that you're going to abide by. Are you going to be consent driven, which means you're going to have your customers opt in to providing this data and allowing you to process it? Or are you going to be notification driven, meaning that you have to tell the customers what you're about to do? And if they want to opt out, then they can opt out. So you have to decide upfront which one of those processes you're going to follow as an organization. And then based on your physical location or the location of the data or the people you serve, you are going to have to determine the level of transparency that you're going to provide and how you're going to communicate that. So it's not just if you're building a product, it's if you're running your customer data through any type of AI, even if another vendor
Mm.
supplies it to you, you may be required to be completely transparent with your customers that their data is going through this process. Especially if you're in the EU, we do have new transparency requirements that have been built into law. So you must determine what your transparency is. And then you're going to want to determine what your processes are internally, which processes you will trust to be run through this level of automation or this level of decision making, which is AI, and what you're going to allow. So, will you allow private HR information to go through there? Are you just going to relegate it to your support team? Are you willing to have marketing and sales use that? And then any back end operations, because the risk and the implications of building AI into your organization is pretty significant. Because
Mm.
AI, because it's based on statistics and probability, and it's not binary, will eventually fail. So if that fails and it fails in a spectacular way, what risks have you opened your organization up to? And then the last part that you need to figure out is once you've determined how you're going to treat your customers, how are you going to demand your vendors treat you? So will you demand complete transparency from your vendors? Will you demand consent? Are you going to demand very minimal technology where it's needed, a sort of surgical precision, as opposed to them just throwing all of your stuff into a
Mm.
large language model? So you really need to think through those four aspects and figure out how will you treat your customers, how will you behave internally, and how do you demand your vendors treat you?
Mm. And are there any resources and templates out there to help MSPs go through that process of understanding?
Yeah, we did recently publish a white paper that does outline this for MSPs. There are a few other organizations that are on the forefront of this. The Center for Humane Technology is a very forward-leaning, forward-thinking group of people who do talk a lot about this ethics and the pillars of ethics for AI. That's an
Mm.
interesting place to go. IBM has a great set of resources for organizations that are adopting AI as well, and they talk about different pillars. So that's an amazing place to go. The IBM Watson team has been preaching this and teaching this for decades, and I highly
Yeah.
recommend that. And beyond that, you really do have to rely on what your local government regulations are, and they do have offices that are being set up for AI standards and AI ethics.
Hmm. Hmm. So it is, yeah. It's still an evolving area, and I suppose the bits and the pieces of the jigsaw are kind of falling into place slowly.
Yes.
But I suppose that, yeah, the main point being that MSPs aren't completely out on their own with this. There are places that they can go to get the support, guidance, and I suppose advice they need really to kind of to
Yeah.
yeah to start using AI properly, or to start embedding it in their organizations properly.
Yeah, and I do recommend that you have at least one or two legal conversations up front when
Mm.
determining the data privacy and the transparency aspects of the conversation. If you get that right up front or you make it clear up front and they communicate that out, the rest of your journey is going to be much easier because at that point you'll be able to just work on use cases that are important and not have to make a series of decisions every time.
So you mentioned the white paper that I know you've recently written. I suppose the final part that I wanted to talk about was the area that you touch on in there is kind of like how MSPs go about evaluating whether they need to or the types of AI product or different AI products, and how whether to integrate those into their business, and but there's a very clear process, really, isn't there, for doing that? It's not, so the MSPs, because there is so much out there, and because there are tools, there are separate tools, there are
Yeah.
tools embedded in other tools, there is so much out there, and it can be a bit of a minefield. But I think you kind of set out a really nice process by which MSPs can really kind of evaluate the different individual MSP AI tools, and whether it's worth it for their business, and in fact whether it's AI they need, or whether it's machine learning they need, or different things like that. So can you just walk us through that a little
Yeah, so there are two aspects to it. The first is the level of complexity. So, are you going to use somebody else's technology? Are you going to try to tune an existing set of technology? Like you hear tunings quite a lot. Are you going to combine different algorithms or tech together, or are you going to build your own capability? So, if you think about that as the level of complexity, and then you're going to put that on top of a very simple use case analysis process. And so you have to understand what are we currently doing? What's our current efforts against that? And then the second part of that is what data do we have available? So when you pick a use case and then you say, what data do I have available on it? That's going to narrow down your field of use dramatically. You can
Mm,
actually throw out 90% of your use cases once you just have the second aspect. Because in order for you to do anything like building your own machine learning or AI, you're looking at requiring hundreds of thousands to
mm,
millions of pieces of data that's well labeled, clean, and well understood. So if you don't have a very significant amount of data, you know for sure you can't build your own. And in fact, you may not even be able to combine different resources together. So that almost eliminates the second category of capability as well. So you won't be able to use anything that's less than tens of thousands of sets of information
mm,
if you want to combine different algorithms together to make new technology. So that you can put those off the shelf immediately. So if you want to do something like tuning AI, you want to, let's say, I want to have a ticket system that looks at my existing tickets and suggests my next likely solution. That can be done with just a few thousand records or a few thousand pieces of well understood, well labeled, clean, good data. So that's actually an open capability. And then if you don't have thousands of pieces of data that's clean and well understood and believable or true, then you're stuck. You're basically relegated to just using someone else's tech. So just by saying, what is the use case? What data do I have available? Immediately you can drive into, well, these are only the three or four things that I could do, and I might have to use somebody else's tech to do it. So when you have that, you're looking at, okay, what's the technology feasibility? What different pieces of technology can I pull together? And then what's the business value? By doing this and putting in this effort, how much value am I going to drive? And does it actually offset the cost? And then the last thing that you're going to look at is risk.
mm,
Because if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. We're doing something with statistics and probability, not something that I said before, it's
mm,
binary. Yes, it's all math, but statistically speaking, there's something called drift, which is my answers can slightly change or alter over time because I'm typically learning when I put together something that's in the AI or machine learning category. So you want to work on things that the risk is rational and reasonable given the benefits that you're going to get out of it.
mm,
It's a really simple decision process, and we do have it documented. But it helps look at the radar, what the data is, your benefits, and the risk, and you can come to a conclusion pretty quickly on which things you should attack first because it
mm,
does have a lot of value and
mm,
it can dramatically improve the interaction that you have with your customers. It can streamline processes internally, and it can take away a lot of the things that when a human does them over and over creates human error.
mm,
So so there is value in adoption.
mm. And I know we talked about there are a number of kind of off the shelf, if you like, tools that people can use to help them develop that. But is it still very much kind of, I suppose, something that would just be for the bigger MSPs, really, in terms of developing their own sort of products around AI? Or do you think it's kind of like, is it much more kind of, there's much more level playing field, really?
Yeah. So with the release of things like Google Vertex and AWS Bedrock and some of the new Microsoft tools like their Copilot Studio,
Mm,
most companies or even just one or two person organizations can create AI solutions without having to do a lot of coding.
mm,
So it is an even playing field as long as you have the data to
mm,
train it,
yeah.
right? That's really where it becomes a an interesting arms race of sorts. So, but you don't need a lot of people. You don't need to be a developer in order to actually achieve some of these AI use cases, but you do require data. And in
Mm,
some cases, you can purchase that data. Right? There's one of my favorite online communities is called Hugging Face. It's huggingface.co. And there is a community of machine learning specialists who teach other people how to create really advanced technology, and they sell data sets.
mm,
So you could actually use somebody else's data set if it's trustworthy and clean and it aligns to your use case. So it's open to anybody who's interested in using this as a method of differentiating their organization.
mm.
Simple things like tuning, you can do that right off the shelf in a few days. If you wanted to train a large language model on all of your knowledge base articles and you're confident that they're correct and true, you could have that up and running in very, very little time with no code and one or two people.
Mm.
So there's a lot of tools that have evened the playing field, is whether or not it makes sense to do that kind of an investment and whether or
Yeah.
not you have the data to support it.
And I suppose you touch on the point there, which is the integrity of the data. Really, it's like,
Yeah.
is there a and that realistically, even right back to the early days when we started talking about Chat GPT last year, I know that sort of, the integrity of the data is everything. Is there any way? Are there any sort of guidelines in terms of how you ensure the integrity of that data, or are you just kind of like finger in the air and hoping?
Yeah, let's hope you don't finger in the air. Um, Now, it's a very interesting and a very hard question, right? So there are,
Mm,
you know, hundreds of thousands of classes on data engineering, and that's what this is at its core. It's a form of data engineering where you have to review the information. You have to make sure it's in the right format. You have to make sure it's labeled properly, right? There's this whole discipline around metadata and around metadata accuracy and metadata control planes. And all of that has to go into you understanding and respecting the information that is going to be used to create the outcomes that you're looking for. It's going to train the algorithms that create the outcomes that you're looking for. There are methods that you can use. So as complicated as the answer,
mm,
but somebody has to physically review it
mm,
most of the time. There are methods of training information where you can use something called synthetic data.
mhm,
That's a new and emerging practice. It has been in play at sort of the MIT Media Lab for a few years now. And that is the process of using a small set of well understood data that you know to be true and correct, and then creating additional versions of that data using different machine learning algorithms. So it actually generates more data that you can use for training. So if you're starting with a small set of well understood data, you can actually create a much bigger set synthetically.
mm.
Um, that's a little bit more advanced, but it really exists out there now. And there are a lot of tools that you can use to help with that. So I think that's a really interesting practice. And then there are some sets of algorithms that will identify patterns within information that hasn't been well culled or well processed. That's typically reserved for things like image processing more than things like data processing.
Yeah.
So, for example, you use the algorithms to find patterns in images. And by definition, when it finds disparities in the patterns, it will create new nodes of understanding or new centroids, where it creates a new category for the information that doesn't match the pattern. That can go sideways very quickly. You end up with real big problems with things like bias
Mm,
and mislabeling. And when you see things
yeah.
go really wrong, that's typically what it's happening. It's nobody's
Mm,
gone through and visually inspected the data.
mm. So I think really, to kind of wrap it up, this the key points that I suppose are coming to me. I mean, apart from obviously that you have to go through a process of kind of, it's a regulation and legal process of explaining to people what you're doing and being transparent about how you're doing it, but also that actually there are enough tools out there for even the smallest of MSPs really to be taking advantage of the opportunities that AI brings
Yeah,
to our industry. And it's not just it's not another thing where, if you're a 2 or 3 person MSP, you can say, well, it's not for me, it's only for the big guys. But there are plenty of opportunities really for everybody to be getting on board with it.
absolutely. I Everybody should be trying this. even if you're not putting into production, um, it would be a shame if you didn't even step your toe, especially into the generative AI aspects and using that to augment your internal employees. There's a lot of powerful tools out there. They take very little setup. It's very low cost, and you can train it on your information. That's called you can tune it on your information really quickly. So
Mm,
I strongly encourage everybody to figure out what data you're willing to work with and how you're going to tell people you're working with the data,
mm,
and then bring it in house and try it out. You can greatly improve efficiencies. And
mm.
it does show that people are more satisfied with their job. There was like a 50% increase in job satisfaction when they had a tool to help them do their mundane tasks.
Yeah. Well, that makes complete sense, really. I suppose just really to round this off, I'm going to get you to kind of get your crystal ball out, and this may be a sort of like this may be a dangerous thing to be doing, and in fact, a really difficult thing to be doing. But how, what do you see coming out? I suppose in the next, in terms of where do you see AI going? The developments in AI kind of going in the next like say 12 months. I wouldn't go any further than that because I think it would be pretty much impossible with the rate of change to look beyond that. But what do you see as the big things kind of coming up
Yeah,
really in the next year?
it's going to get smaller and faster.
Mm,
Right. So right now, when we talk about AI, a lot of what we're talking about is, oh, we send stuff back up to the cloud and it does a lot of stuff in the cloud, sort of like magic, and we get a result. And where I see things going is that's so inefficient and expensive. We're starting to see lots of really, really small algorithms and small capabilities come out that are going to get shoved down to our end devices and
mm,
work with lots of other really small algorithms. So I think we're going to actually start seeing a lot of this processing go from center to local and become even more hyper focused and hyper specific, which is really important and really powerful. So our edge devices will end up being AI devices. And I think that's absolutely going to come true.
mm, mm. Well, thank you for your time, and thanks for talking to me about this. I mean, I do think this is a I think it's a fascinating area. I do think it's a bit scary at times, sometimes as well. But I think generally it's fascinating, and I'm sure we will come back to this and have more conversations about it in the future. But again,
I would
Nicole,
love to. I feel like we had 20 minutes to talk about what people have spent hundreds of years, figuring out. So,
yeah, well, exactly. I could have we could have gone on, but I think we did sort of like I think it's break it down into digestible chunks. We can come definitely. I think there's opportunity to come back and talk about this again. So again, thank you for your time.
thank you. This is wonderful.